Mark Chen knew the late-night train schedule better than he knew his own reflection. Every Tuesday, after his grueling shift at the downtown hospital, the journey from Manhattan back to his small, cramped apartment in Astoria was a blurry ritual of exhaustion. Tonight, however, the weariness was a thick, oppressive blanket. The fluorescent hum of the subway car, the rhythmic clatter of the tracks, and the sparse scattering of other late-night commuters quickly lulled him into a half-sleep, his head lolling against the cool, grimy window. He must have drifted deeper than usual. When his eyes finally flickered open, the world outside the train was a blur of unfamiliar darkness. No flashing lights of passing stations, no familiar rumble of express trains. Just a profound, unsettling silence. The train itself was motionless, perched on tracks that seemed to stretch into an inky void, and the car was empty, utterly, unnervingly empty. Mark's heart gave a sudden, panicked lurch. He sat upright, shaking off the last vestiges of sleep. He fumbled for his phone. Dead, of course. He pressed his face against the window, trying to pierce the gloom. Outside, the tunnel walls were different. Not the familiar grimy tiles and electrical conduits, but rough-hewn stone dripping with moisture. It smelled of damp earth and something else, something metallic and faintly acrid, like old blood. "Hello," he called out, his voice hoarse, swallowed by the cavernous silence. No response. The emergency intercom button was dark, unresponsive. He tried the doors, pushing against the cold metal, but they were firmly locked. A sudden faint scratching sound echoed from somewhere in the darkness ahead of the train, rhythmic and deliberate, like nails dragging across stone. It grew louder, accompanied by a low, guttural whisper that seemed to slither through the silence, just beyond the range of comprehension. It wasn't human. It was too deep, too ragged, a sound that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Mark backed away from the doors, his breath catching in his throat. He peered down the length of the empty car. The overhead lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. In the faint, distorted light, he noticed details he hadn't before. The seats were torn, the fabric stained with what looked like dried mud and rust. Graffiti covered every available surface, but it wasn't typical tags. These were crude, frantic etchings, tally marks, desperate pleas, names scratched into the plastic, and one symbol repeated again and again. A rough, stylized anchor, identical to the one he'd seen tattooed on a homeless man's hand that very morning. Suddenly a loud clank echoed from the adjacent track, followed by a heavy thud. Mark spun around. Through the opposite window, he saw a fleeting glimpse of something enormous and dark, sliding past the train, almost touching the glass. It moved slowly, silently, like a leviathan in the deep. It was too vast to be another train, too indistinct, to be anything he recognized. It was merely a mass, a shadow, and as it passed, the air in the car grew impossibly cold. He stumbled backwards, tripping over his own feet, landing hard on the grimy floor. He scrambled to the far end of the car, his eyes fixed on the retreating darkness. As the shadow disappeared, a faint, sickly, phosphorescent glow lingered on the tunnel wall where it had been, illuminating more of the crude anchor symbols. The whispers returned, closer now, seeming to seep from the very floorboards and walls of the train car. They were still indistinct, but he could almost make out fragments, lost, forgotten, the passage, deep, beneath. Mark pressed himself into the corner, his mind racing. This wasn't the F train. This wasn't even the New York City subway. He knew he was somewhere else, trapped in a forgotten realm beneath the city, a place that time had swallowed whole. And whatever shared this place with him was just beginning to emerge from the endless dark. Mark's blood ran cold. The thought of being trapped in this forgotten place, miles beneath the bustling city he knew, was a terror far greater than any monster. The whispers grew louder, clearer now, forming chilling, fragmented sentences. The tide claims the lost, the passage opens for you. He scanned the car desperately. The doors leading to the next car were also locked. His gaze fell on the emergency hammer, meant for breaking windows. His hand trembled as he reached for it, but then a new sound stopped him dead. A faint, metallic clink, clink, clink echoed from somewhere ahead, followed by a distant, hollow whistle, like wind rushing through an empty pipe. It was the sound of a train approaching, but it was wrong, too slow, too deliberate, and laced with an unsettling mournfulness. Relief and terror warred within him. Another train? Salvation? Or something? Far worse. He pressed his face to the window again, peering into the inky blackness. The faint phosphorescent glow on the tunnel walls intensified, outlining strange, archaic symbols he couldn't decipher, interspersed with more anchors. The approaching train's sound grew louder, a heavy, grinding rumble that vibrated through the floor of his stationary car. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and damp ancient metal. Then a single distorted headlight emerged from the gloom, impossibly dim, casting a long, wavering beam. It wasn't a modern subway train. This was an ancient, rusted behemoth, its cars caked in grime and what looked like dried algae. Its windows were dark, like empty eyes. It moved with a slow, grinding inevitability, its metal wheels screeching against the tracks, a sound that grated on Mark's nerves. As it drew alongside his car, he could make out crude figures silhouetted within its dark windows, standing motionless, staring straight ahead. They weren't riding the train. They were the train. Just as the spectral train passed completely, another terrifying sight unfolded. His car, which had been in a seemingly endless tunnel, now slid slowly past a platform. It was a subway station, unlike any he'd ever seen. The platform was crumbling, water pooling on its cracked concrete, illuminated by a sickly green glow emanating from corroded overhead lights. More of the crude anchor symbols adorned the station walls, etched deeply into the stone. And on the platform, standing utterly still, were figures, dozens of them. They looked like commuters, frozen in time, their clothes outdated, their faces gaunt and pale. Their eyes, or where their eyes should have been, were dark, hollow voids. They were covered in the same grime and dampness as the ancient train, their forms barely discernible in the faint light. They didn't move. They simply stood, facing the tracks, waiting for a train that would never come, or perhaps had already passed. As his car continued its slow, inexplicable movement past the spectral station, Mark saw something on the platform that made his blood run colder than anything else. Near the edge, amidst the stagnant figures, stood a woman. Her clothes were distinctly modern. A bright blue jacket, a familiar brand of sneakers. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, just like the others. But in her hand, clutched tightly, was a phone, its screen shattered, but the small familiar logo of his own hospital, the very place he'd left hours ago, was visible on the corner of its cracked display. She was a nurse, someone he might have worked with. Someone who, like him, had taken the last train home. The whispers in his car intensified, no longer just his name, but a chorus of desperate, mournful sounds. Stay with us forever. The light in his car flickered erratically, threatening to plunge him into total darkness. The stench of damp earth and blood grew overpowering. Mark pressed himself against the back wall of the car, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization. He wasn't just trapped, he was being welcomed to a station that was not a destination, but a tomb. I've continued the story by revealing the ghost train and the eerie, forgotten station, making the horror more tangible and personal. For Mark, with the appearance of the modern nurse. The ending of this part leaves him with the chilling understanding that he's been drawn into something far more insidious than a simple breakdown. The image of the modern nurse, a silent sentinel on that forgotten platform, was a chilling confirmation. Mark wasn't just in a phantom tunnel. He was in a graveyard, populated by the lost. The whispers swelled, surrounding him, no longer just mournful, but a growing, insistent clamor. He could almost make out individual voices now, faint cries for help, desperate pleas, mixed with the roar of phantom trains and the lapping of unseen water. He risked a glance at the doors, then at The emergency hammer. Breaking the window might be his only chance, but to what? The inky blackness outside the train was a void. Suddenly, the floor of the car began to vibrate violently, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from directly beneath him. The air grew heavy, thick with the metallic, acrid stench. The graffiti on the walls, the crudely scratched names and anchor symbols, seemed to pulse with the faint phosphorescent glow, as if they were absorbing the strange energy. Then, from beneath the train, a faint groaning sound began, like immense gears grinding, slowly turning. The car gave a lurch, a sickening roll, as if it were being lifted, or perhaps lowered. Mark scrambled to his feet, gripping a pole for balance. The whispers coalesced, forming a single collective voice that boomed through the car, yet remained ethereal and chillingly close. It was a voice made of echoes, of forgotten cries, of the deep, cold silence of the earth. The passage is open, the surface that recedes. Come, join the eternal commute. Through the grimy windows, Mark saw the tunnel walls changing. The rough-hewn stone gave way to something older, darker. He glimpsed vast, unlit cavern systems, dripping with stagnant water, stretching into abyssal depths. He was no longer in the forgotten subway tunnels beneath New York, but truly below them, entering a realm that predated the city, a primal darkness hidden beneath layers of concrete and steel. The train car continued its descent, slowly, inexorably. The lights inside flickered, dying out one by one, plunging segments of the car into absolute blackness. Panic threatened to overwhelm Mark, but a strange, morbid curiosity began to take hold. What was down there? What entity commanded this endless journey? His gaze fell upon the anchor symbols again, now clearer, more numerous, glowing faintly on the walls of the descending tunnel. He remembered the homeless man with the anchor tattoo, the one he'd passed that morning, looking vacant, almost lost in thought. A sudden, terrifying connection clicked into place. The commuters on the platform, the nurse, the tattoo, they were all part of this. He noticed something else on the wall, amidst the glowing anchors, a large, intricate carving, partially obscured by dripping moss. It depicted a towering ancient structure, far grander than any subway station, stretching upwards into an unseen ceiling, its base submerged in dark water. And from this structure, tendrils of what looked like solid rock or hardened roots extended, wrapping around smaller human-like figures, pulling them down into the depths. The structure was crowned with a familiar distorted anchor symbol. As the last light in the car died, plunging Mark into total darkness, the descending motion stopped with a soft, unsettling thud. The door at the far end of his car, the one that led to the next, previously locked, now hissed open with a breath of frigid, damp air. A faint, pulsing, sickly green light emanated from the darkness beyond. And in that light, silhouetted at the entrance of the next car, a figure stood. It was tall, impossibly thin, its form indistinct in the gloom, yet radiating an ancient, hungry power. It wasn't human, but it wore something familiar, something that made Mark's blood freeze in his veins. A tattered old MTA uniform, its fabric caked with ancient grime and what looked like dried brine. The figure slowly extended a long skeletal arm, its hand adorned with a glowing, intricate anchor symbol, and from its depths a voice, a single raspy whisper, echoed in the profound silence. Next stop, passenger. The eternal journey awaits. I've escalated the descent, revealed more of the terrifying underworld beneath NYC, and introduced the chilling conductor figure, tying it back to the mundane details of the subway. The voice, ancient and chillingly resonant, seemed to wrap around Mark, pulling him forward. The skeletal figure in the tattered MTA uniform stepped fully into the dim green light, revealing more disturbing details. Its face was a smooth, featureless expanse, but where eyes should have been, two pinpricks of that sickly green light pulsed with an unnerving intelligence. The anchor symbol on its hand glowed brighter, casting dancing shadows across the decaying uniform. "Step aboard," the figure whispered, its voice a dry rasp, yet carrying the weight of untold millennia. "The express awaits no one." Mark found himself moving, not by his own will, but as if drawn by an invisible current. His feet shuffled forward, past the now open door, into the next car. This car was even older, darker than his own, its seats completely rotted away, revealing rusted skeletal frames. Water dripped from every surface, forming murky puddles on the floor. The air was thick with the smell of decay and the omnipresent brine. The phosphorescent green light wasn't coming from overhead fixtures here, but from the very walls, pulsing faintly, revealing glimpses of the horrifying carvings. More anchor symbols, more figures being pulled down, and now grotesque depictions of skeletal, root-like tendrils emerging from the bedrock, enveloping entire structures. The ancient structure he'd seen carved in the tunnel walls earlier was clearly this place, a vast subterranean station built from the living rock itself, sustained by something unspeakable. As Mark entered the car, the door behind him hissed shut, locking him in. The spectral conductor moved, its long, thin arms sweeping towards the front of the train, beckoning him. Mark felt compelled to follow, his mind screaming in protest, but his body unresponsive. He moved through car after car, each one more desolate and ancient than the last, until he reached the very front. The front car was different. it wasn't a passenger car, but what looked like a control room, though infinitely larger and more primitive than any modern train. In its center, a massive, gnarled lever protruded from the floor, made of dark, petrified wood and bone. It pulsed with the same green light as the conductor's anchor. The conductor stopped before the lever, turning its featureless face towards Mark. The green pinpricks of light intensified, burning into him. "You are a sleeper, Mark Chen," the voice whispered, now oddly clear, as if speaking directly into his mind. "One of many. The city above, it builds and destroys, but the true foundation, the deepest currents, reside with us." Then the true horror unfolded, not just in the words but in the images that flooded Mark's mind, projected directly from the entity's consciousness. He saw the building of the very first subway tunnels, the men digging, striking deep into the bedrock, unwittingly disturbing something ancient. He saw them find glowing, pulsating mineral veins, a source of unimaginable energy. And he saw them, the first conductors, the original subterranean inhabitants, emerging from the disturbed earth, their forms slowly adapting, taking on the guise of the very industry that invaded their domain. They didn't possess the trains, they became them. They didn't haunt the tunnels, they were the tunnels, extending their consciousness and their physical forms through the vast, dark network. The conductor pulled the lever. With a colossal groan, the train began to move. Not forward, but sideways, horizontally. Through the vast, open cavern systems, Mark saw countless other trains, ancient and glowing, moving on parallel tracks, each filled with silent, motionless figures. They weren't going to a destination. They were expanding, building, converting. A sharp, searing pain shot through Mark's chest. He looked down. A glowing, intricate anchor symbol was slowly, sickeningly forming on his own hand, radiating the same sickly green light. The whispers returned, but this time they were his whispers, rising from deep within, joining the chorus of the lost, the consumed. He felt his consciousness begin to unravel, his individual thoughts dissolving, merging with the collective hum of the ancient entity. His last coherent thought was of the F-train, its familiar rumble, its bright lights. Then even that faded, replaced by the profound, unending silence of the deep. His eyes, fixed on the growing anchor on his hand, slowly became hollow. 2 green pinpricks of light in the deepening gloom. He was no longer Mark Chen, exhausted commuter. He was a new conductor, a part of the vast living subway system, forever expanding, forever waiting for the next sleepy passenger to take the last train home. The ghost station didn't just never end, it grew. And Mark was now a part of its eternal, horrifying expansion beneath the unsuspecting city.